It's really about observing and paying attention to the general patterns, right? Because it's not going to be like, if they're an introvert, they're not going to be quiet and in their heads all the time, right? Just like we as INFJs know, we prefer introversion, but we can get out there. Look, we're doing it right now on the podcast, right? And so you have to look at the general overall, what does your child look like with each of these preferences, and what gives them energy versus what tires them out.
Hi there, this is Sarah Kuhn. If you are an INFJ or in a relationship with an INFJ or related to an INFJ in any way, and you want to figure out how they operate, what makes them tick, and how to communicate with them better, this is the show for you. It's called The Quiet Ones. This is a show that deconstructs INFJs, what they are, how they think, how they feel, how they operate, and how they relate to people with other personality types. Whether you have just found out that you're an INFJ or have known for a number of years, there is something for everyone. You will learn more about your personality type so that you understand who you are and understand how you operate in the workplace, in relationships, in your family, and with friends. I want you to walk away from every episode feeling like you have a place of belonging, feeling like you are no longer alone, feeling like you have a place to be heard and seen and understood as you really are. This is a place to connect with other INFJs, to learn and grow and really thrive. I want to give you inspiration and real life strategies that are going to help you figure out how to live your best life every single day. Though INFJs are very rare, you are not alone in this world. You are not the only one who thinks the way that you do and feels the way that you do. Hear from real INFJs just like you. Hi there, I'm Sarah Kuhn. Welcome to another episode of The Quiet Ones. Today we're talking to Sandra Etherington from Family Personalities. Sandra is a family type practitioner, certified in Myers-Briggs personality type for both adults and children. She uses her training and experience in working with families through coaching and in her podcast, which is also called Family Personalities. So let's get right to it. All right, so tell me a little bit about you and your podcast.
Yeah, so I host a podcast called Family Personalities, and I also own a business called Family Personalities. And my goal is to bring the Myers-Briggs personality type to families, so you can use it in your parenting by understanding your own personality type and also your children's personality type, really, so you can give them more of what they need to thrive and grow. Because I think a lot of times we parent either the way our parents parented, or we look at what our parents did and said, oh, I didn't like that, I needed something else, and we parent the way we wish that we were parented. And it was a startling realization to me that my kids actually need very different things than what I needed when I was a kid. And Myers-Briggs helped put words to that and helped me understand that on a deeper level. So I want to bring that to other people. So that's what I do through my work and through the podcast.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to talk to you too, because a lot of my listeners have asked me to talk about parenting and, how Myers-Briggs plays a role in that. And I'm like, I don't really know. I'm not a parent, so I can't really relate. The only piece that I can relate to, I have a niece who's 16 years old. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of more like a second mom to her. So I can relate a little bit with that. Yeah. But as far as smaller children, I have no basis to even start to speak about this. So I'm excited to talk to you. Mm-hmm. What's your personality type?
I'm an INFJ, of course.
Oh, awesome. And how did you find out that you were INFJ?
I found out, okay, this is a great story. So my first career was in the corporate world. And in the corporate world, they do a lot of Myers-Briggs, right, to help foster better teamwork and all that sort of stuff. And the guy that I was dating at the time, we actually worked at the same company. And I think he was a little higher up than me. So he was able to attend the Myers-Briggs training, but I wasn't. And he came back from that training, was telling me all about it. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And he's like, here's what your type is. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was like, you're this letter, and you're this letter, and you're this letter, and you're this letter. And I was like, oh, no, sir, I am not. And so I went online because I had to prove him wrong. And actually, the thing that I disagreed with him the most was the J, the judging function, which I am. So I did not prove him wrong. But but I thought it meant something different than what it actually does. I was like, I am not judgmental. So I went online and kind of looked into it myself. And when I finally landed on INFJ as my type and I read the type description, I think it was on personalitypage.com, which is like the most archaic website ever. I think it was created in like when the internet was first born and then never updated. But the content of that website's really great. And that description, I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, how does this description on the website know more about me than I know about myself? And I just thought it was incredibly fascinating. And so I just like dove headfirst into Myers-Briggs and trying to understand what it was all about.
Yeah. And then you went on to get a certification for Myers-Briggs too. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm certified from the Myers-Briggs company. And then I'm also certified from the Meisner-Murphy Type Indicator for Children, which is basically Myers-Briggs for kids.
So how did you decide to start a business? What made you want to do that?
It was looking into children and type and then applying it in my own family and finding that so beneficial for myself. And then I would talk about it to other people and they'd be like, wow, this is really cool. I want to know more. Tell me more. And I just felt like, oh, this is something that I could do. And I was a stay-at-home mom for the first, 6 years. And I wasn't sure all during that time if or when I would want to go back to work. But I had such a passion for this that I thought if I could make something out of this and really do what I'm most passionate about, then that would be fun. And so I decided to create this business that really you don't see anywhere else. And so it's been an interesting journey figuring out how to bring this to people in an effective and helpful way.
Yeah, for sure. I was so fortunate that my niece is so excited about personality types.
What is she?
She's an INTP.
Oh, okay.
So she wanted to learn about it and she got so obsessed, just as obsessed with it as I was.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot of time going back and forth about, what does this mean? And how do I connect with other people? And it helps so much when she gets into arguments with her parents or when she gets into situations at school with her teachers and things. It's so amazing. And it's great for me to be able to give her a reasonable way to say, listen, you are arguing with somebody incorrectly. You're trying to come at somebody with logic when they have a feeling personality type, and that's not how that works. Somebody who has a feeling personality type isn't going to want to be logical and practical.
Right. And INTPs, they have that like drive for the truth and they feel like everyone must have that. And so someone's going to be happy that I've told them the truth, no matter how it came out of my mouth. Right.
Right.
And so I think that's a hard thing for them to realize is that like, no, that people want you to be kind to them first and then you can tell them the truth.
Right. Right. And she will argue with you incessantly. And that's one of the things that my mom is like, I don't understand why she just argues with you and argues and argues and argues. And I'm like, well, it's because of her personality. Like that, mm-hmm. That doesn't make it any more fun to deal with when you're in the moment. But once you have that understanding behind it, then you can say, okay, this is how she is. She's not trying to be rude. She's not trying to be aggressive. That's just how mm-hmm. her personality is. And once you understand that, you can approach it a lot better.
Yeah. And INTPs and ENTPs are like, that's how they work out their ideas is by arguing through them with people. And it's actually kind of their superpower. Like they're great debaters.
Right. I told her, I'm like, you need to consider going into like being a lawyer or, some kind of criminal justice thing. Cause you would do really, really well at that. I mean, you can argue people to death. They'll just give up. Like whether you're right or wrong, they'll just give up. So I would think that the first step would have to be figuring out what personality type your kids are. Do you have any tips for being able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of resources around it, which was what I noticed when I first started. I had my kids and I was like, oh, I wonder what their personality type is. And can you even tell yet? And, I had all these questions around it and there's not a lot out there. But I mean, you can listen to my podcast for one. I've started going into each of the preference pairs and how to see how they show up in children, right? And then I've just created a download. I hope to create more for each of the preferences, but I have one on my website now for introversion versus extroversion. Just kind of the easiest first access point, right? Is my child prefer introversion or does he prefer extroversion? And you can also follow me on Instagram because I post a lot of things on there, and you can just kind of scroll through and see, is my child more like this? Is my child more like that? But it's really about observing and paying attention to the general patterns, right? Because it's not going to be like, if they're an introvert, they're not going to be quiet and in their heads all the time, right? Just like we as INFJs know, we prefer introversion, but we can get out there. Look, we're doing it right now on the podcast, right? And so you have to look at the general overall, what does your child look like with each of these preferences, and what gives them energy versus what tires them out. Because all of us with introversion, extroversion, most of us are pretty familiar with that concept now, that extroverting yourself tires you out, then you're probably an introvert, and vice versa. But it's the same with the other preferences too. Like as feelers, we can use logic. We're perfectly adept at doing that. But if we're forced to do that all day long, every day, it's going to feel frustrating and exhausting, and it's going to mentally tire us out. So that's kind of something to look for in your kid.
Yeah. One of the biggest things with my niece that I found is when she's trying to make a decision, because she has a perceiving personality type, it is incredibly difficult for her to make a decision. So planning ahead for us is essential. Like if we're going to a new restaurant, I have to tell her 3 days in advance, we're going to this restaurant, here's the menu, think about what you're going to order before we get there. Because having that, she needs that extra time, because she can't just sit there in the moment and say, okay, this is what I'm going to eat. She has to look at the menu like 12 times.
Get all the information first. Yeah, my daughter is an ISFP, and she doesn't like to make any decisions if she can help it. She's constantly hungry. This one, she's always, I'm hungry. And I was like, hey, what do you want to eat? I don't know. Just bring me something. She says, just surprise me. Because she, like, just making the decision of what she wants to eat in that moment is so hard for her, or what she wants to wear in the morning, you know?
Yeah. So you mentioned before that your kids have different personality types. How does that change the way that you parent them?
So my son is an INTJ. So very similar to INFJs, but, they have that different way of making decisions, the thinking versus the feeling. And then my daughter's an ISFP, which is a little bit different. She still has the introversion and the feeling and that sensitivity, but it's different. And I don't know how much you guys go into the complexities of Myers-Briggs type on your show, but if you are a feeler who's also a judger uses a different kind of feeling than a feeler who's a perceiver. So even though my daughter's a feeler, she uses an entirely different type of feeling than I do. She uses something called introverted feeling, whereas INFJs, we use something called extroverted feeling. And keeping that in mind and knowing that can be really helpful to understand where she's coming from when she's getting sensitive about something and feeling really upset. So how I use it in my parenting. With my son, I have to remember to switch over to that logical part of my brain when I'm trying to give him any feedback. So for example, as a T, children tend to be more blunt, right? They're just getting their message across, and they don't have that natural awareness of how that's going to land with people. So for example, my daughter might be coloring and say, oh, Riker, do you like my drawing that I made? And he'll say, no, I don't like it. You were out of the lines here. I don't like that color, right? And to him, he's not trying to be mean. He's just being honest. Like I was asked if I like something, and to me, it doesn't look right because I know that good coloring has, these colors, and that you don't go out of the lines. But to her, that was so incredibly hurtful, and she immediately started crying. And so I have to talk it through with him. And first of all, have empathy for the fact that he's not trying to be mean. Whatever you do, don't label your T kids as like mean, because that's basically you're telling them that as that type, they are wrong or incorrect or lesser somehow, right? And we don't want that as people, INFJs, who are very different from the society. We know we don't want people telling us that we're wrong for being, introverted or sensitive. And so you don't want to tell a thinker child that they're wrong or mean for having that direct honesty and logic, right? So we start from a place of empathy, from understanding why he said what he said. And then I use logic to explain how what he said hurt her feelings. And once I can do that, which takes me some slowing down, because to me it's just so obvious, but it takes me slowing down and breaking it down. And then I say, and that's why we don't tell people right off the bat that we don't like their work. And now he, as a TJs are great at making rules and then following them, but they have to understand those rules first. They're not going to just blindly follow a rule. But if they understand the logic behind a rule, they'll put it right into place and follow it. So with my son, it's just I have to logically walk him through the rules and then he'll follow them perfectly. And he's never told his sister he doesn't like something that she's made since then.
That's awesome. That sounds a lot like the conversation that I had with my niece too about, you hurt your grandma's feelings and now she's mad at you. And my niece is like, how did I hurt her feelings? I was just being honest with her.
Yeah.
So going through the step-by-step process of, well, you said this and that made her feel this. And that's why she's mad. And you need to go apologize to her. And she's like, why? But like, are you serious? And I'm like, yes, this happens to you a lot. Don't you? Like, let's talk about the pattern. And like you said, for me, it was the same thing of, how can you not see this? Like, it's so blatantly obvious for me.
Yeah.
So it's been a really good learning experience, I think, for both of us in that situation. So you talked a little bit about how you walk through the process with your son. How do you educate your kids all the way around about their personalities? I mean, it must be difficult to break it down and I'm not sure how old they are as well. Like, what point do you start?
Yeah, my daughter's 5. My son is 7.5. My son, I've gone over some of that with him, and I actually went through like a very mini basic self-typing thing with him, and was kind of explaining to him the different preference pairs, and he 100% chose I, N, T, and J. But I don't know if that's just partly because of how I was wording it to help him, understand himself. But so I don't explicitly go through the Myers-Briggs types with them very much, especially not with my daughter yet. I will when they're older, and I'm looking forward to that. But when I work with clients, if they are of 2nd grade reading level or higher, I involve them in the process. And the older they are, the more involved they are. And especially once they get to teenager age, that's when I let them own the own choosing of their type. Before that, it's the parents are choosing the type, but we call it a best guess type, and you keep watching as your child ages and until they're able to choose their own types. Ethically, it's not great to put a type on someone else. You want them to be able to own that type, that discovery of their own type, and what's the word I'm looking for? And the resonation with that type.
A lot of people ask me if your personality type changes as you grow up. Do you think that it changes?
You don't become a different type, but you do change within your type and grow within your type very much. I think we can probably all relate to that with it as an INFJ, and either having better access to our opposite preference, so having better access to our thinking side, or having better access to our sensing side, or through self-discovery of maybe we were operating as a thinker our whole life because that's what we were taught was the better way to be. And then coming into, oh no, I really function better as someone who uses empathy first and caring for the collective good of others first, and coming into and owning that more as an adult. Like, that's what something I had to learn, was to own my sensitivity and see it as a superpower versus something I always tried to tamp down. So there's definitely changes and growth you make within your personality type, but you don't change to another personality type.
I had the same experience. I think I grew up believing that I had a thinking personality type because that's what I was taught was good. That was what was acceptable. Don't be too emotional. Don't be crying. Don't show that kind of stuff. You're just a girl. You don't want to do that too much. Yes. And especially for me, because I wanted for a long time to be an engineer. So it's like, oh, now you're a girl in a man's world. And so I got really good at playing the part, but then I
Yeah.
was exhausted all the time, and I ended up being extremely unhappy with depression and anxiety, and I couldn't figure out why.
Yeah.
And it's just in the last few years that I've really started to understand that a lot of it was because I haven't been true to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And tapping into the sensitive side and all of the emotions. When I first found out I was an INFJ, I was mistyped as an INTJ. And my niece was really the person who was like, you are lying to yourself. You are all about feelings and you are not a thinking person. And I was devastated when she said that, because I'm like, oh, that's gross. Like, I don't want to have all
Yeah.
the feelings.
I
That's
felt the same way. I was totally opposed to being a feeler because I didn't see the value in it because it hadn't been taught to me.
right. Yeah.
And think about what gift we can give our kids to really understand the value of their personality type and why it's okay and good to be that type, and what contribution they can have in the world by operating as their real and true self.
Yes. Yes. I liked what you said before too about labels. A lot of times we put labels on things like, being sensitive is bad, being
Mm-hmm.
emotional is bad, but that's not always the case. And that's one of the pitfalls, I think, of the Myers-Briggs personality type is you get attached to this label of being
Mm-hmm.
an INFJ, and you think, well, all INFJs are the same and all ESFPs are the same and they're
Right.
bad. Like, you don't want to be around an ESFP, you want to be around an INFJ. And it's like, that's not the case, because we've all grown up in different places with different families
Mm-hmm.
and, have had different experiences. So having that label isn't always a great thing.
Yeah, yeah. I like to use personality because there's a lot of criticism out there about using, not a lot, but like when I've done Google searches, things have come up about, oh, you shouldn't, personality type your kids because you're going to label them and box them in, or like you want to give them a growth mindset rather than, whatever the opposite of that is. And to me, it's so like, I can't relate with that because I don't use personality type as a limiting tool. To me, it's a growth tool, like understanding yourself on a deeper level to be able to grow as a human being. And so that's how I see it. And so to me, when you're understanding your child on a deeper level, you're giving them more of what they need to become a more well-rounded, healthy, happy person. And so it's not limiting at all. But I do think it can be used in a negative way for sure, to start stereotyping or having limiting beliefs about yourself or excuse your behavior or whatever.
Yes, excusing your behavior. That's a big one. Yes, for sure. So tell me a little bit more about your business and the services that you offer. Do you do coaching?
Yeah, so I work one-on-one with families, and my favorite thing to do is to bring a family on and we do everyone's personality type in the whole family. Both parents, if there are two parents in the home, or if they're separated, we can do that too. In fact, one of the families I worked with recently was a family of three. The parents were separated, but they still had a really healthy co-parenting relationship, and then their son. And so I do all of the family types together. And it's helpful to first understand your own personality type, which I assume all of your listeners already do because they've latched onto this INFJ podcast, to be able to put in perspective everyone else's personality type and understand how they're different or the same. And then I give people, and I do this over Zoom, I give people what tips on their own parenting and what they need to be a fully present and helpful parent, tips for working with your spouse or your co-parent to parent together and see, like, this is how you guys parent differently, this is how you parent the same, and this is why, and having compassion for the other person's approach. And then bringing in the kids and like, this is how your kids are very different or very the same as you, and what does that mean, and what do they need that's different from you, and why are they exhibiting these behaviors that might be incredibly frustrating for you, and what can you do about that. And so looking at it as a whole picture. And I really have a lot of fun with that last piece. Once I get everyone's types and I put them together and create an analysis for you of what your whole family looks like and who's different from who and who has what similarities, and looking at the whole family dynamic, it's super interesting, super fun, and people find it to be really valuable.
Awesome. So tell us where we can find you, your website and your social media.
Familypersonalities.com is my website. You can also find me on Instagram at Family Personalities. And I have a Facebook, although it really is more just a repository for my Instagram posts. It's FAM Personalities on Facebook. And then the podcast is called Family Personalities, which is on, I think, every podcast platform now. We have one season under our belt. We're going with seasons so we can take some breaks. And my co-host is an INFP mom, and she is, we haven't 100% decided on her daughter's type. It might be ISFJ though. And it's a lot of fun. So if you are interested in that, you can go binge the whole first season, and we're going to get started in about a month on season 2.
Good deal. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Yeah, I think I mentioned go check out the download on my website for introversion or extroversion, and there might be more by then, depending on how much time I have. Any other parents listening, you know that this COVID time has been extremely difficult to get any work done with the kids around all the time, especially as an introvert. But yeah, check out my website, find downloads, and I've got something free up there for you to check out.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Please make sure that you subscribe, and also remember that you can watch all of the video interviews at youtube.com/The Quiet Ones Podcast. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you again next week.